Episode 3 of the Crew Call. Great to have the crew back with all of us here. How's everybody doing? We'll start with you, Jack.
Doing great. Day 2 back home in Lewiston. All good. So the weather's a little cooler here, but happy to be home.
Yeah, no question. How about you, Jonesy?
Jack, rocking the St. Patrick's Day shirt. Nobody told me. I didn't get the green memo. I'm good. I'm good, Matty. It's a good day to be hanging with the fellas. It's a good day. People complain they're stuck at home. Nah, I think you're safe at home. That's the best thing.
Yeah, there's no question. How about you, Leo?
Yeah, you know what? I saw somebody this morning said, oh, man, it's Groundhog Day again. Well, if Groundhog Day means I'm isolating and safe, I'll take Groundhog Day. So unfortunately, I'm blessed in the sun here, so it's great.
Yeah, no question. Sherm?
I'm good, fellas. Like everyone else, just trying to stay indoors and make sure to keep myself and my family and everybody else safe. So no complaints here.
And how about you, E? I know you had a 48-hour, 72-hour birthday bash with you, your wife, and your son.
Yeah, 3-person bash and 3/4 of a bottle of wine, maybe the whole thing. But it was a good time. It was a good time. And I dragged the hoop into the backyard last night, so I'm able to play some ball in the backyard in a really small space on the patio stones. But at least that's going to keep me occupied for the weeks or months to come.
So wait a minute. Did the teacher go to school drunk this morning? That's a violation, man.
Online school at its finest. We always take this time to thank, obviously, all the health workers and everyone doing what they're doing to keep everything going. But I'll also add this. For any of us that have had to venture out to get essentials, meaning groceries, thank you to all those that are there, too, at the grocery stores and are stocking the grocery shelves, because you're obviously allowing us to stay at home and obviously get through all this. So thank you to everybody that is working in those essential businesses, guys, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had to do yesterday that I've never done in my life before was actually cut hair. I cut my wife's hair. I cut my son's hair.
She's brave.
Ears out. I had these scissors right here.
Who's responsible for yours then? What happened to yours?
I have not touched it. I just a little trim right here.
I got the high-end clippers when I was buying toilet paper. I got the high-end clippers, so I'm doing the fade with me and Sammy today.
I may be ordering the Flowbee. Remember the Flowbee?
Hey, at least they don't have to go outside and show anybody their hair, so it's all good.
I was going to say,
the
boys have no choice because you're dad, but that's brave on your wife's part.
I tell you what, Aaron was just like, look, it's time. And so I watched a 5-minute YouTube video.
No.
And wait a minute. I only got through 30 seconds and I said, I'm an expert.
I don't think Aaron's going to be going out for a while, even after this.
And there will be no pictures of anybody's hair.
Hey, there's a reason for quarantine. There's a reason. Hey, look at the back. Look at the back. The back's not bad. That's not bad.
Oh my goodness.
Wait, is that your back or hers?
All right, let's get into game 4. This was, and Jack, we begin with you because you mentioned this back when we were discussing an epic game 3 battle. On the heels of game 3, you have game 4. Was this the most complete Raptor performance in the postseason up until this time?
I thought it was unbelievable. When you consider that the bench had 48 points. And here's the thing that really jumped out at me, and it's a trend that happens in game 4 and it happens in game 5. And in my opinion, it really tipped the series. The Raptors in game 4, 32 assists, only 11 turnovers. That's a 3-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. That's unbelievable. And in game 5, they only had 6 turnovers on the road. So when you talk about playing Milwaukee and you only turn the ball over in game 4 and 5 17 times, you're really taking away their major strength, and that is running it down your throat and being a step to 2 steps ahead of you, and your defense can't catch up to them. And I think the Raptors in game 4 with their efficient offense, really allowed their defense to get into a rhythm and now really put the clamps on Giannis and change the flow and the style of play for Milwaukee. This series changed in Game 3 when Milwaukee couldn't put Toronto away, and then the Raptors started to get their momentum going in this Game 4.
After what we saw with Orlando and Philadelphia, I said the matchups are going to be favorable here. Yeah, you have Lopez. Yeah, you have Giannis. You got the size with Milwaukee. But the rest of the team is balanced out. That's something we didn't see with Philadelphia. So all of a sudden now, in Game 3, we got a spark. In Game 4, all of a sudden, Fred's back. Norm's there. The bench is a big factor. And that's the whole thing. The Raptors all season long, their bench was a huge factor, right? They all played. It was good depth. Guys could come in and do whatever they had to do. And now it's back. So the Raptors are operating on all cylinders, just like they were prior to the Philadelphia series. And I think that was huge. And going forward, that's the way it's going to stay.
Yeah, guys, I thought that, as you guys both mentioned, the bench was huge for the Raptors. But to me, this was the jump-off for Fred VanVleet as we saw moving forward in the rest of the playoffs. We saw what he did in Game 5 after Game 4, but he had 13 points in that game, but he became the Fred VanVleet that we knew him to be prior to the playoffs. And also, when you think about the bench in Milwaukee, Jack, you mentioned the Raptors outscoring them, but the Raptors more than doubled their bench. So the fact that Brogdon and Hill were doing such a great job in hurting the Raptors, I thought they did a good job paying close attention to those guys in Game 4 and making sure they took away their successful play. And that, to me, impacted everything that Milwaukee did with the answer from Serge and the answer from Fred and the answer from Norm off the bench. But I thought that this was one of those games where you talk about a complete game. Well, the Raptors won every single quarter in that game. A dominant home performance, Eric.
I think to back up your point, Sherman, about doubling up 48-23, the bench scoring for the Raptors, and the fact that it came from, as you said, just those three guys, as we saw as we went on in the postseason, the tight rotation, keeping it tight, keeping it locked down with that 8-man rotation, and the fact that I think Milwaukee ultimately didn't have the answer the way that we saw in the previous round against Philadelphia. That's what we were talking about in the Sixers series, how much the bench was a major factor and maybe one of the key talking points in that series, how good Philly was and how they were taking it to Toronto. And the Raptors maybe struggling a little bit the first couple of games, but suddenly now, as you say, VanVleet comes alive, Powell starting to make shots, Serge Ibaka, finding his form yet again and having a huge performance. And I think that was the ultimate key. Talk all you want about Lowry or Kawhi. It was the bench that really got it done and really helped, bring the Raptors to the even point in the series.
It's something we always look at, as Sherm said. They won every quarter. And then here we are in the middle of the series again, Game 4, and who's coming on? Serge Ibaka was 17 and 13. He has a huge game. And Jack, to your point about the Raptors' offense and the way the defense was working in concert with the offense, Milwaukee shot the ball well. In Game 4, they shot the ball well. And I think the thing that struck me most about Game 4 and Game 5 is they always say the team that loses is the more desperate team, and they come out more desperate. In Game 4, Milwaukee came out hard. Raptors kind of quelled the threat. In Game 5, the Raptors had 4 points halfway through the first quarter. They were down. Nick had to call early timeouts. They're down 16-4. Milwaukee's like, yeah, we haven't lost 3 in a row all year. We're back home. And they threw a huge haymaker, and the Raptors kind of got their footing back on the ropes a bit. They had the game tied by, late in the second quarter. So I just thought, again, the theme of the resiliency of this team, the bench, everybody chipping in. And I thought in Game 4, as it was mentioned before, once Fred got going, because he's a key guy. I mean, he's the mini Lowry. He's the guy that does a lot of the same things. I thought his play was fantastic, too, in Game 4.
Jonesy, you mentioned it, Sherm. You did. Everybody really touched upon it. But this is where the legend of Fred Jr. arrives.
Yes.
Right? Little Freddie Jr. And all of a sudden, Sherm, you talked about this, just the spark. And so much of this, it's interesting when you go back now and you look back to then, and we hear the discussion. Jack, you've talked about it often, as have you, Leo, you hear this discussion from Nick Nurse where it's 2 months. And if you continue to work at your game, right, those opportunities are going to come up. But really, it's not just taking shots, Sherm. It's all of a sudden, hey, it's not a 23-foot shot that I need to work on. I need to work on a 27-foot shot over range and distance. When I get to the inside, I got to have a layup, as we've seen Fred since that time. It's not just a layup, off the square. It's high off of the window, Sherman. So here comes Fred Jr., but ultimately, as Fred Sr. said, hey, it's on me. And you think about all the work that he put in, and you start to see it here in this series.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, Fred Jr. gave Fred Sr. permission to go out there and play basketball at some point. And I thought that when you think about Fred, and again, this is something that we see from smaller guards in this era of the NBA. They want to get further from the three-point line because that's their advantage. Their advantage isn't closer to the basket all the time. It's further away because bigger guys and bigger bodies have a more difficult time moving their feet out there in the light air. So guards, and we see it with guys like Damian Lillard and Steph Curry, these guys are stepping further and further away from the basket. Well, we see Kyle do that, and we see Fred do that. But one thing we all know about Fred, and we saw this throughout his time in a Raptor uniform, is he has the ability to use his, we'll call it stout body, to create contact and create space and angles to get those shots off. So he's a very smart player when it comes to finishing around the basket because he knows that his size could be a disadvantage down there. But to your point, Matt, he's finishing higher off the glass. He's finishing with different English in terms of his release points and, his ability to fool or elude the defense using the rim as another defender. All these elements he brought into his game. But the three-point shot was huge for the Raptors in terms of Fred's ability to make it. But we saw more of that revelation in Game 5 because he went nuts in Game 5.
Matty, I was going to jump in for a second here. Maybe I'll throw it over to Leo after this because his buddy Charles Barkley was the one that I remember saying this at the time. And I honestly don't remember if it was after Game 4 or 5, to Sherman's point, where VanVleet went off in Game 5 and followed up that performance in Game 4 as well. But he only had one double-figure scoring game in the first 15 games of the postseason, then went double figures back-to-back Game 4 and 5, was unconscious from 3 Game 4 and 5. And one of the points that Charles and I think Kenny was making, Leo, is they said that we don't worry about necessarily a guy that has, a 2 for 10 game or a 1 for 9 game. It's the guy that's maybe 2 for 8 or the guy that's, 3 for 11 or something. Somebody's taking a fine right now. But it's those guys that you
not at home. You're not
because they stop shooting, right? Those guys stop shooting. He said, I'll take the guy that keeps shooting because I can see that he still has confidence in his shot and he still has the confidence in his ability that he knows eventually it's going to go down. And you think back to round 2 when VanVleet had back-to-back games with Ofer putting up donuts, unable to score, and he just kept plowing through, and then it finally came. And he said, and the guys were saying on the inside the NBA, you keep thinking about those guys that have the confidence to stay with their game and to don't get dragged down by it.
I gotta add this point, a less technical observation. We're all dads, man. All right, we're all dads, and we know how having kids impacts your life and changes things for you. And you look at what Fred, all of a sudden, he goes from struggling to that burst of adrenaline. Hey, shh. That burst of adrenaline.
That wasn't a human being, everybody.
That wasn't the wife. That was the dog. That was Summer. But, we're all dads, so we all understand. And now you're not playing for you, right? You're playing for your kid. You're playing for your family. And it really does change everything. And I think for Fred, almost like he needed that, right? It's like, you can't just have a baby on call. But that was a big boost for him. And from that point on, he just never looked back. And we all know that feeling.
Leo, it's interesting because it's something we always as basketball people talk about, to Eric's point and Fred getting it going. You don't get to this level without some modicum of confidence. And the next shot is always going down. And, Leo, it's one of your favorite phrases I love. Miss till you make till you miss. Just keep shooting. Just keep shooting.
Shoot off the
Fred and Fred didn't turn down shots. And that's something we talk about. Now because when you start doing that, it destroys the rhythm of your offense. Your rebounding is off. The defensive balance. People expect you to take that shot. And I thought it was interesting when Nick Nurse, as you said, Matt, came up with that simple solution. Well, yeah, the length is giving you a problem. Well, just back up. And it seemed like something simple. And just think about this, guys. A lot of the shots, the way basketball is being played now, we'd never see 15 years ago. They would be bad shots. You'd be sitting on the bench.
Is that why I was on the bench my whole career?
Well, if you'd have made them, Leo, if you'd have made them, they'd have let you in.
Small point.
Blame the coach.
You know, it's interesting because after the 52-point performance from Kawhi in Game 3, it was almost as if everybody around him said, hey, man, we got this, right? You took care of business in Game 3, got us back in the series. And, you know, he finished with 19 points, shot 6 of 13, you know, off to a slow start early, all understandable, stepped up big, late, as we all know. But, Jack, you know, this was one of those games where you mentioned the bench, but also Marc Gasol. There's a tremendous amount of ball movement in this game, 32 assists against a very stout defensive team like the Milwaukee Bucks, Jack.
Well, the beauty of Marc Gasol is you can put him in the low post, the high post, mid post. He's a great screen setter. And if you look at the Raptors when they acquired him, the ball just started humming. People started cutting harder. The quality of screens was better. The quality of shots was better. Guys enjoyed playing with each other. There was no concern of whether I'm going to get touches, because you knew, based upon the guy's reputation and his skill level, that everyone was going to get involved. And the best teams I've ever been around, the pass is a cool thing. It's a cool element of how you play. And Sherm, I think that is a great way to play and a fun way to play, because if you know you're getting it and at the same time you're willing to give it to the next person, it just brings everybody together. And I think the Raptors were truly at an elite level in Game 4 because of a guy like Marc Gasol.
No question about it. And when you think about ball movement, Jack and guys, this has been a huge part of the fabric and the DNA of this team. When they move the basketball, they are significantly better and much more difficult to defend. And to your point, Jack, you know, I had the pleasure of playing with a guy like Steve Nash. And one thing you know when you play with a guy who's willing to pass the ball and who can get you the ball at any moment is, to your point, you cut harder. You run the lanes faster. Your hands are always ready. Your eyes are open. You're looking for the ball. You're just going to do things at a more efficient and high rate because you know the opportunity to receive the basketball is always there. And the beauty about Marc is when he comes into the game, not only does he provide that offensive punch, he provides defense on that back line in a different way than a Serge Ibaka does. He's on the ground, he's quarterbacking, he's doing some good things in terms of getting his body in the way. He has active hands. I just think that when he's quarterbacking their offense, they are a different team because of the way the ball moves, and defensively, they're on a much better string.
Fellas, I don't know if there's anything more comforting, and I've said this to Nick too, and he's kind of laughed and chuckled. I don't know if there's anything more comforting than going, and for the fans that are watching this, into the elbow series where Marc Gasol has the ball on the elbow and there's two guys cutting on one side of the floor, because Marc's going to make the right play. It's one of those things where I think it's a lost art that people really understand how to play. We've got a lot of young players coming into the league that don't fully understand back picks and back cuts and who's going to be open and where it's going to be open. And if you wait another second or two, that guy's going to turn his head defensively and you'll be able to zip it past his ear. Marc Gasol knows all of that. And then the fact that, I mean, you watch him, he's changed his game. When he first came into the league, he was a low post kind of player. Now, with the changing trend in the NBA, he's able to stretch it out, play on the outside, and his passing game is so well-rounded that I just think he gives the Raptors so much on the offensive end. And you know, every so often, he remembers how big he is, and he's able to go inside.
By the way, I said 52 points. Kawhi, 52 minutes of action at 36 points in Game 3. Game 4, you guys all touched upon the bench and the bench being back. And It's Norman Powell once again, right? Here comes a consistency. Serge Ibaka, who we've talked about this before in episode 1, actually, about his performance in Game 7. There he is, and then the emergence of Fred VanVleet. How relieving, Leo, was it for you to watch? Like, okay, the Raptors are back to who they are. Maybe would that be right to say in Game 4?
Yeah, 100%. And it was that's the feeling I got. It was comforting. And like I said, I anticipated it happening based on matchups. But when you see it, you're going, okay, all right, this is it. This is good. Because with everything everybody's mentioned right here, when you're talking about the bench being back, that involves more shots being made. That involves better ball movement. That involves more energy in whatever you're trying to do, because these guys are all playing at a high level right now. So it changes everything. And I think a lot of people got excited about that. I know, Jack, you got excited about that. You were talking about that a lot.
No, yeah. And it was interesting. Eric, I want to throw it to you after this because you made a really interesting point. I don't know if we were in Utah. We were on the West Coast trip. And you made a point about people forget that Norm Powell was a Milwaukee draft pick. Right. And the Raptors acquired that for Gravis Vasquez. And, you think about the games that Norm Powell has had in the playoffs in the 2 different playoff series against the Bucks. And Gravis Vasquez has been out of the league for quite a while. What a great trade that was. And we forget all about it. And a guy like Norm, to your point, Leo, he came up big, and he has had some big games against the Bucks. And Eric, I can't remember the other point you tied into it with not only a guy like Norm Powell, part of that, but the other end of that.
Well, the other pick that was part of that trade with Vasquez turned into OG Anunoby, so another stroke of genius as it turned out for the Raptors, where, with due respect to Vasquez, who had some moments for the Raptors, I think you'd do that deal 1,000 times over, walking away with Norm Powell and OG Anunoby, considering what they've turned into for this team. And just maybe that's a point that we haven't even discussed in any of these shows yet, is that the Raptors are doing all of this without OG Anunoby, who battled through, obviously, the injuries and some of the issues off the court and everything else, and then the appendectomy and everything that was going on. So even in the face of losing a key player, they still find a way to get that production, not only from the starters, but as we're now talking about the bench. And I thought, Jonesy was mentioning the Raptors winning every quarter. When the game first started, it was nip and tuck, at least for the first 6 minutes or so, 8 minutes or so of the game, because Giannis was getting to the rim time and time again. I think his first 5-6 field goals were all right at the rim. But when Toronto went to the bench in the second quarter, it was those guys, Powell, VanVleet, Ibaka, to me, that really kind of turned the tide and put Toronto in that lead position to kind of, take it right through the stretch.
Here's the thing that I noticed too in kind of looking back at the games. The psychological aspect, as I said, Milwaukee comes out. They always talk about the more desperate team. Milwaukee comes out, and as Jack said, they left the arena that night, and the same way the Raptors did in Game 1, thinking, "Man, we let one get away," and this is not a time to be letting stuff go. You're not going to have a lot of chances against good teams to get it back, and they came out hard. They were desperate at the start of Game 1. They came out with an intensity that they thought, okay, we're going to maintain this. We're going to get a lead. We're going to ride this out. And I just thought the psychological fact in both Game 4 and 5 that Toronto came back, and now Milwaukee's, wait a minute, we gave you our best shot and you're still standing here in front of us. And now the other guys start to get involved. Kawhi Leonard has buoyed the confidence of guys. Lowry was terrific. And we talked about Serge, and the bench is coming on. Now you're trying to defeat a cause right now, not just a team. And these guys feel it. And I thought that had the psychological impact was huge for Toronto.
We're going to wrap this up, but I want to leave with this thought. It's now 2-2. And I remember leaving the building that night saying, Raptors have the series. I don't know if it's going to be 7, but the Raptors have the series. Sherm, start with you, and we'll kind of go around the horn here. But what was your thought when you left the building that night?
My thought was Milwaukee's in trouble. I felt that the Raptors really not only came home and in Game 3, the ability to get the job done in the double overtimes, but in Game 4, to just handle them and just say, when we're a complete team, when our bench is clicking, we have guys who are playing at a high level. And remember, Pascal Siakam didn't have a very good game that night either. But when everybody's clicking and then Pascal comes to the party, Milwaukee, you can't do anything with us because we have Kawhi Leonard as well. And I thought that Milwaukee left the building in a more desperate position to get Game 5 than the Raptors were going to Milwaukee knowing that they were going to get Game 5.
I think my biggest thing was, can the Raptors continue to do what they're doing on Giannis? Because even though the numbers might look pretty on paper, I would argue that in the 4 games, even including their 2 wins, outside of his rebounding, I wasn't necessarily scared or overly impressed at this point with what he had done offensively. And I think the Raptors have been doing a solid job defensively on him and kind of limiting what he was getting, especially when they had time to set up their defense.
2 minutes to go. Jack?
The thing that jumped out at me was the fact that the Raptors had already won 3 road playoff games going into Game 5. And if you look at the Raptors in the 6 years of their success, now 7, they've been an outstanding road team. And I think the confidence that you had to have, and you look at what they did then against Golden State, winning all 3 road games in that final series, was the fact that if they could just get 1 road game, whether it be a Game 5 or 7, you like their chances. And they had the best player in the series in Kawhi Leonard. And as we know what happened in Game 5, it all came together. But the reality is, when you look at the Raptors in the regular season and even in the postseason, they had been a good road team. And I think that confidence level of holding home court, but the ability to win away from home, Leo, is a critical factor.
You know what, Jack? Throughout the whole playoffs to this point, I never felt the Raptors cracked, even when they're down, even when they're, maybe struggled in the game. And I thought Milwaukee cracked. I thought Milwaukee was broken at this point. And I saw 0 adjustments from Mike Budenholzer. Nick Nurse has done a masterful job to this point, and I think that was really starting to show.
I agree, Leo. The Raptors said they only needed 1 on the road, and this was it. And look, they could have been up 3-1 leaving that arena that night.
All right, Game 5 coming up in the next episode of Crew Call.